Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm author, leadership, and team development speaker Joe Woodley, and this is a special edition, a 9/11 edition of Key Moments for Faith. Thank you guys so much for joining me on today's episode. Before we go any further, please take the time to go down to the subscription box, subscribe to this channel, like this video, share this video with your friends, your family, your neighbors, the guy down the street around the corner, and even your enemies, and they may just happen to become your friends. Also take a look in the description box where you're certainly sure to find something to help you on this journey we call faith. So as I said, guys, today is 9/11. 9/11, 2021. And 20 years ago, I still remember that morning when our nation was attacked. And I remember how I felt that day. I don't know if you guys remember it or not, for those of you who were alive during that time. But that event forever changed the course of our nation. And since then, our country has experienced radical changes that have caused me to really question whether or not we have forgotten that day. You know, every year I see posts online, memes where people say never forget on 9/11 of every year, never forget. And we see images of the Twin Towers, which are no longer standing. We see images of the Twin Towers. We see what happened to the Pentagon. We see what happened out in the field in Pennsylvania. We see these images, these disturbing images, and we always say over and over again, never forget, never forget. But I am really questioning whether or not we have forgotten. And I want to talk about that in this episode and remind us of where we were at the time. And let's take a look at where we are now and what has happened to this nation, and why I'm asking this particular question, have we forgotten? So on that particular day, I was at work sitting at my desk, and I remember I got a phone call from someone who was back in the control center. At this particular time, I was working corporate security for a large company. And so I got a phone call, and one of my coworkers had stated that a plane had hit one of the Twin Towers. And I thought to myself, this guy is obviously lying, because he was always telling jokes. He's one of those guys who was always telling jokes, who was always making things up. You never quite knew whether or not he was telling the truth. You just didn't know. That was his personality. And, you just questioned whatever he said. And he said, a plane hit the building. And I was like, there's no way in the world. It didn't happen. And then I got a phone call again and said another plane hit the other tower. I looked online at my desk, pulled up the computer, and I remember yelling out in the lobby. I was angry. No one needed to tell me that we were under attack. I knew it instantaneously, because there was no way this was a coincidence. I was angry. I wanted to do something. I didn't know what to do. And I was concerned because I was living in Ohio at the time, and I still live in Ohio till this day. Most of my close family lived in New York at the time. My mom, my sisters, my dad still lived there. So they all still live in New York. But I remember how I felt, how angry I was, and how sad I was, because I knew that a lot of people had lost their lives. I had visited the towers numerous times growing up, and I've been there as an adult. I went to a school, as a matter of fact, before I moved to Ohio. I went to a school called the New York Restaurant School for a while, which was actually in that vicinity. So I was out there 4 to 5 days a week, taking an accelerated course in French cuisine and culinary arts. And so I knew the area quite well. I would later come to find out that my little sister was actually scheduled to be in that area. We had a conversation earlier today where she kind of recounted what was going on, and she was scheduled to be there for an appointment. I guess the first plane had hit the building, or one of the planes hit the building. My mom had called her and told her, don't go. She was already on a train, but was getting ready to do a transfer, and she said, don't go down there. And she let her know what was happening. And if my sister had gotten on this next train, she would have been under the towers when they fell. A close friend to the family, one of my aunt's dear friends, actually died as a result of what happened there. She didn't die on that particular day, but when the plane hit the building, my understanding is that she was in the elevator, and as the flames came in, she gasped, and the fire went in, and she survived for a while afterwards, but her injuries were just too terrible. Her organs began shutting down. She was burnt all up on the inside, on the outside. She was almost unrecognizable. It was a terrible situation. So many people died down there. And as I said, I was angry. I don't know if you guys remember that. My supervisor at the time was a former Secret Service. And he said, when I was talking to him at the time, he says, oh, Joe, we already know who did this. They knew immediately. It was not like they needed to do some long investigation. He said, I guarantee you, we already know who did this. He had served in that agency for several decades, so he was well aware of the capabilities of the United States government. And, so he came up and he talked to me about what was going on. And I tried to reach out to my family, and it was difficult to get in touch with people because it was just chaos, absolute chaos. Every plane in the country was shut down during that time, so people couldn't fly out. They were panicking. People were leaving, trying to rent vehicles so they could get back home because they were afraid. Everyone was thinking there was going to be another imminent attack. And so people were afraid. The country was, talk about lockdown, the country was really on lockdown. I mean, people were scared out of their minds. I remember several gas stations here in Ohio got warnings because, of course, whenever there's a tragedy, someone tries to take advantage of things. So several of them attempted to do price gouging, and they jacked the prices way up to like $5, $6, and all kinds of craziness was going on. So it was a terrible, terrible situation. I probably, if I was capable of it, I probably would have joined the military. I mean, I was seriously thinking about joining the military and going to get who did this. As we know, that was Osama bin Laden, and he had orchestrated it with these other individuals. And I was hurt. I was really, really, really hurt. And I was angry. And like I said, being a native New Yorker, those of you who are from New York, you understand when you're born in New York, even though you're a U.S. citizen, you kind of identify more so with being a New Yorker. But let me tell you something. On that day, everyone was a New Yorker. On that day, everyone was an American. On that day, we were unified. We were unified. Everyone was angry. Everyone was hurting. Everyone was sad. As a matter of fact, I remember for over the course of the next few weeks, I actually had to stop watching the news because I became obsessed with watching the news to see what was going on, what was going to happen next. And I became physically ill from watching so much of what was going on. It was making me ill. It was literally making me ill. My stomach was sick. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't sleep at night. Horrible situation, like I said. And I had to turn the news off because they would replay the planes going into the towers over and over and over and over again, hour after hour. And like I said, it made me sick, physically ill, psychologically. It was traumatic. A lot of people were traumatized by what happened. And as you know, of course, it would be years later, over a decade later, before we finally took bin Laden out. But as I said, on that day, we were all Americans. We were all Americans. We were unified. Everyone wanted justice. Everyone wanted the right thing to happen. And the country came together like no other time I've ever seen in my life, before or since. Those of you who are around know that in the early 90s, the Twin Towers had been attacked then by a bomber who had driven in with, I believe it was a U-Haul truck, underneath one of the towers and tried to take them down. And they ended up putting barricades around that were looked like huge plants, looked like huge potted plants that were around the towers, and it was designed to keep trucks from going into or plowing into the building. So the defense mechanisms that were put up around there to protect them, because they knew that they were a target. The world was different. So that was in the early 90s. So here it was years later, and they actually succeeded at taking them down. So everyone wanted justice. Let me talk to you about what the temperament of the people in the country were at that time. People were far more considerate and caring of one another. When I went back to visit, I remember it must have been that November. I was driving up the highway. My grandmother was still alive at the time, and I remember driving up the I-95 corridor. For those of you who are not familiar, I-95 runs north and south on the eastern seaboard of the United States of America. So it'll take you as far down as down into Florida. So I was going up there, and I remember looking over, and the towers were so tall that you could see them from the I-95 corridor, even in the southern and mid part of New Jersey. And I remember looking over, and I thought to myself, oh my God, they're gone. Like, it wasn't real. It was real, but it didn't hit home, the enormity of what happened, until I looked or saw that big gaping hole in the skyline. They were gone. And I was used to driving up, seeing the towers, and it was like almost like a welcome home type of feeling. I'd see the towers and I was like, I'm almost home, right? They were gone. Man, it was stunning. My heart dropped into my gut seeing that gaping hole. Dropped into my, it's like somebody just, man, it was unbelievable. So I got there, and I remember seeing all of the extra security and everything that was in place, the security measures. So it really was kind of surprising to see all that. We wasn't surprised because I knew what was going on, but it was a culture shock for sure. At that point, also Columbus changed how they allow people, because at that time in Columbus Airport, you could go directly to the gates to meet people coming off the plane. That stopped. That wasn't happening anymore. The airlines were hardened, or the airports were hardened as well. So you could no longer just walk right up to the gate to wait for somebody to get off the plane and welcome them there. They had to get off that gate and come through. And you guys know, who fly regularly, you know how it is now with all of the security procedures that are in place. So it was a dramatic change. It was really dramatic change. And of course, the troops going overseas. And I honor each and every one of you. I do. I honor our servicemen and women, many who paid the ultimate price. I honor our first responders, who many got sick digging through the rubble to recover bodies, because they knew no one was surviving that. They knew that there was no rescue plan. It was just, we need to get survivors. We need to get the bodies, the remains of these individuals who had perished, and some were never found because of how devastating that event was. And they had their own battle with the U.S. government, and still are battling with the U.S. government to get the documentations of what happened, who was really behind it, all that stuff. And so I encourage them to continue for battling that, because there's a lot of things that the U.S. government knows that they are not willing to share to this very day. And so I support the families who are fighting for the truth and for justice. But we were far more considerate of one another. I remember walking through the streets of New York, and people were, you gotta understand, in New York, people don't look at each other in the face. When you know where you're going, you're not looking at the people who are around you on the sides. You're just going to get there. And so you kind of keep your head down, you look down, you just go, particularly in the city, and people are kind of like just busy or in the hustle and bustle. And so they're just going. They're not looking around. They're looking up at the building. Generally, if you see people that are in the city that are looking up at the building and admiring the architecture and all that stuff, they're tourists. That's generally how it is. Most people, they get there and they are on their way, they're gone, right? They're not focused on that. But people were actually saying, excuse me, and thank you. And I appreciate that. Like I said, in New York, that's what was going on. And so people were more considerate, and they were caring, and they were sharing, and they were loving, and we talked to each other, and we cared for each other, and we looked out for each other, because mind you, when that happened, the economy was damaged as well. So there were people who went through some very difficult economic times, and neighbors looked out for each other. They weren't all about hoarding things for themselves. They really extended themselves, even if it meant that they didn't have as much for their own homes or their own families. They looked out for each other. I had friends and family who called to make sure that I was okay psychologically. Check and see how my family was doing. How's your family doing? You know, all of those things were. There were a lot of things that were happening that were very positive in regards to how we associated with one another as a nation. We didn't see each other as enemies. We, like I said, we were all Americans. And it didn't matter whether you were black, white, Hispanic, Asian, or whatever. Was there an uptick in some things that were going on in regards to people who were from the Middle East? Yes, but there was also people who stood up for people from the Middle East and said there's two separate things going on here. They are different than the ones who attacked us. And so we were far more unified, and there were flags everywhere. Everywhere you looked, there were people with flying flags. I think I had a flag somewhere in my place at the time. It was red, white, and blue everywhere. People were just, it was amazing. We were honoring, as I said, our first responders, our police officers, our service members. We talked about being more unified. We lifted each other up. People on polar opposites of the political spectrum complimented one another. Even through their disagreements, they would say, I respectfully disagree with you. It was just a very different time. I said I love you a whole lot more during that time. I always say I love you to my son and to friends of mine and loved ones. I do that. But I mean, as a whole, that's what it was like. People held each other a little bit closer, a little bit longer. We were more respectful of each other. So it was a different time. It was a very, very different time. And that phrase, never forget, that statement was sealed in the annals of time. And every year since then, as I stated earlier in this broadcast, you heard, never forget, never forget, never forget. And I'm questioning, have we forgotten? I am seriously questioning, have we forgotten? Because that country is gone. The attitude and the temperament of the people in our country at that time is gone. And you may be saying, well, there was an emergency, so it was important for us to come together. But it's always important for people to be together and to support each other and to lift each other up and to be supportive and to be loving and to be caring. But those days seem like a distant memory. We are far less unified now than we were from even before 9/11 of 2001. Far less unified. You could at least sit down with people you disagreed with and have a conversation. Not anymore. We treat each other like bastardized kids. The respect that we once showed each other, gone. The dignity that we had for ourselves and the love of country that we had, gone. We're far more tribal than ever before. We see each other as enemies, dependent on what the label of your political party is, Democrat, Republican. We see each other as enemies. Rather than looking for commonalities and common ground for the good of the nation, we're always looking for a way to one-up one another and to take our opponent down. So we're tribal. We are far more discriminatory. And I don't mean just racially. I'm talking about who we're willing to reach out to, who we're willing to talk to, who we're willing to associate with. As I said, we won't talk to people who have differing opinions from us anymore. Just to even gain an understanding of why do they think the way they think. One of the best things that ever happened to me was, in fact, moving to Ohio. my first few years in Ohio were very difficult emotionally and everything else. There was a lot of things that happened in my life at that time um, that were difficult. And I'm not going to get into all of that stuff. But there's some very difficult things that happened in my life that really hurt me a lot. And so I had to learn to get to know people, open up to get to know people who were different, who came from a different environment. My coworkers and people around me used to call me city slicker because I used to talk so fast. I've learned to slow down my speaking. Because when I used to talk, talk really, really, really fast. So they used to call me a city slicker because of how fast I would talk and my accent and everything else. And I learned how other people think and why people think the way they think. And I discovered that I had a lot more in common with people than I realized. And there is a certain level of arrogance, dare I say, from people who grow up in big cities, particularly New York or Los Angeles or some of those coastal big cities, because you'll think that you're more cosmopolitan, right? You live in these metropolises and you think that you're just far more cosmopolitan, and you've been exposed to more cultures and you're more culturally aware and all that kind of stuff. And there's an arrogance, and you can overlook people in the country and you dismiss the value that they have. And I'm grateful that I got to meet people and develop relationships with people who didn't grow up like I grew up, who didn't have the same type of associations as I had, or even some of the same viewpoints. It opened me up to be able to see that we all have the same basic needs, wants, and we may have some different approaches in achieving those things, but people's lives matter, their opinions matter, their feelings do matter. Even though feelings are not facts, people's feelings matter, and we need to learn to appreciate those things and understand them and respect people. But all that's gone in 2021. When you turn on the television set and politicians are not just attacking each other, but they're attacking each other's constituents and telling their constituents that the other constituents want to destroy them personally. Now, don't get me wrong, there are people in this country who do want to crush the system and destroy the system. And I also believe that the government, there are entities within the government that are not looking out for your best interest. That being the case, what I'm seeing is politicians who are turning people against each other, families against one another. There are families who will not speak to each other because of political party affiliation or because of numerous other issues. And that once unified nation, we've forgotten that. We're far less tolerant of each other's opinions. Far less tolerant. I don't want to hear what you have to say, and you don't want to hear what I want to say. And you know what has exasperated the situation is social media. Because social media brings out the worst in so many people. It brings out the absolute worst in people. People treat each other so disrespectfully, and they say things to each other online because they can dehumanize that person. They don't have to look at you in the face and they say disgusting things. I've had people cuss me out online. I've had people send me all types of ridiculous messages, hateful messages, sometimes racist messages. People have done all sorts of things online that in person, they wouldn't dare do to my face. They wouldn't dare say to my face. They wouldn't dare act out in particular ways around me or around you or around other people. So the internet has exacerbated the situation. because people can other one another. They can other each other. I don't have to associate with you. I don't need to see you as a person, so they dehumanize each other. We're far less moral than we were at that time. Let me tell you something, morality matters. It really does. Because when morality becomes relative, then what is valued in a society can change at the flip of a coin or a hat or at a moment's notice. What was once valued no longer becomes valuable. Respecting people, well, it's just your choice. Honoring people, that's your choice. Honoring authority, that's your choice. Not a big deal. I can act any way I want to act. I can treat anybody the way I want to treat them, because when I embrace moral relativism, none of that matters. Right becomes wrong and wrong becomes right, as the Bible says. We're entering into a time of it. So more or less moral. So, we don't really even watch television because there's a lot of the garbage that's on there. The news is less moral. I don't know if you guys remember, you never heard anybody cuss on TV. When I was a kid, you didn't hear anybody cuss on TV. I know when I was a kid, but you didn't hear people cussing on TV. Now you turn it on, and it's like all time, all hours of the day and night, it doesn't matter. Kids' cartoon shows are promoting things that many parents find disturbing, as they promote immorality over morality. And my gosh, if you say something about it, then you're the bad guy. You're the one who is the whatever the ism is, or the phobia is, or whatever, because you want to raise your kids to be moral and to have a certain set of values. And since then, we become far less moral. And that's why we can do the things we do to each other. And we can treat each other the way we treat each other. Because there's no standard anymore. You remove the morals, you remove the standards. So it matters. So when people say it doesn't really matter, whatever makes you happy. But if it makes you happy to hurt somebody or the wrong people, we're far less trusting of each other. Far less trusting of each other. We're far less civil. Can't have civil conversations. We cuss each other out in a moment's notice. Cuss each other out online. Cuss each other. You go to the store, and some of the things I see happening in our stores, it's like, I don't even, I question who has raised some individuals. I really question that. We're just less civil. We have a disagreement. We want to hurt that person. We want to make them look bad. You see it all in our politics, from the top down. You see it all in our politics. It's everywhere. Far less civil of this once unified nation. We're more self-centered. We're more self-centered. I want what I want, when I want it, and how I want it. And even if it means that I hurt you, or that I am infringing upon your rights, or whatever. I don't care about that. I just want to be happy. I don't care about your happiness. I don't care what makes you feel good. I just want to feel good. I just want what I want. And if that means destroying you by any means necessary, I'm going to get what I want. We're so self-centered. We're self-centered with everything. We're self-centered with our relationships. We're self-centered with how we approach our relationship with God. It's always me, 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 and what I want. Not really looking out for one another. I know these are generalized statements in some sense, but in many ways it's not. We've lost sight of God. All right, when that happened, when that day happened, people flocked to churches. And I'm going to say this. Many churches were not prepared for the influx of individuals who came in. And we need to repent for that as church folks. I wasn't back completely in the church at that time. It will be a series of events that led me finally to get back into the church. But people were flocking. They wanted to hear from God, and they needed people, the men and women of God, to speak to them as oracles of God and to share the heart of God with them. And in some ways, I do believe that many in the church, in some ways, we failed to do that effectively. And since then, less people go to church now than we're going then. I mean, the numbers were already declining, but we're less focused on God, including in the church. We talk about everything but God, or we talk about God and Jesus, and we present him as the magic genie Jesus. We're more focused on a magic genie Jesus than the Savior of our soul. And the abundance, not just financially, not just health-wise, the abundant life, the relationship that he wants us to have with him. We're focused on everything. We talk about any and everything else. We talk about politics. We talk about money. We talk a whole lot about money. We talk a lot about, you name it, sports, any and everything else. Many of our churches have become inspirational centers, and we just want people to just feel good all the time. We never ask the serious questions, and so it's no wonder that many of us we've just lost sight of God in this country. I mean, it's obvious that we've lost sight of him. As I said, look on television, look online, go through your local neighborhood, walk through your store. And it's really obvious that we have the lack of morality, the lack of self-respect, and the dignity in how we treat each other is a direct reflection on how we see God and how we see our relationship with the Lord. And we messed up there. We missed out on a moment. We're also far less free than what we were at the time. We're far less free. And when I hear people say, United States is the freest nation in the world, and I'm like, really, it's not anymore. It really isn't. We have so many policies, the invasion of people's privacy, their private lives, spying on United States citizens, taking away people's freedom of speech, taking away people's property, taking away their rights. I mean, look at the world we're living in right now on this particular date. Freedom of speech is gone, just about. I mean, you say the wrong thing, you'll get shut down. Social media will shut you down. People will attack you online. They will cancel you. So cancel culture is a very real thing. They will try to destroy your life. And why? All for the perception of safety. Not because you are any safer, but for the perception of safety. Right? Everything that we did, that we're doing, is for the perception of safety. Is COVID going to go away? No, it's not. It's going to be with us, and it's going to stay with us. And the government might as well admit it. It does not mean that we should not take some appropriate precautions, and people should be wise with how they conduct themselves, starting with taking care of your own personal health and well-being. At the same time, telling people that if they take a shot, it's going to end COVID. It's not true. It just isn't. We haven't ended the flu. People have been taking shots for years. Has the flu gone away? No. Violations of our personal liberties, our privacy. We had the Patriot Act that was established. That thing has been expanded underneath every single president since. Every president, without exception, has expanded on it. They're all in your emails. You know, people are like, well, if you're not doing anything you shouldn't do, you shouldn't worry about it. That's not the point. The point is you have the right to personal privacy. Personal privacy. And so your privacy has been stripped away. You can't preach in some churches where you can, but you get attacked for that. You know, God forbid you actually preach what's in the Bible, and people want to try to sue you over it. Strip away your rights there. Postings online, you name it. This is from a nation that was 20 years ago unified and focused, and saying that we're going to be a better people. And we've allowed the government to hoodwink us in a lot of ways. And so it's hard to see that and to witness that. I don't think those of you who are millennials or maybe even a little bit younger understand how fast the transition has happened. I mean, for you, it's normal because that's all you know. 20 years is not a long time. Life is not as long as you think it is. And so 20 years is not a long time. And to see everything that has happened, yeah, I have to ask that, because when that day happened, it was like we want to be freer than ever. That was what the mindset was. We want to be freer. We want to be safer, but we want to be freer. We want to be more unified. We want to be more connected to each other, to our neighbors, to our family, to our friends, and to our God. We want to be more loving and more respectful of each other. It wasn't just about the buildings going down, because that was traumatic in and of itself, but it's about what it symbolized. You know, loving our neighbors, respecting authority. We celebrated our first responders. Now they're all villainized. It's totally opposite. You know, every cop is bad? No. You know that's not true. Disband the police force, knowing good and well that there are people out there. It's funny, the people who are pushing these policies don't even live in the communities that are going to be affected by it, but they push these policies that are going to hurt the people who live in the neighborhoods who need the protection. Is there a lane where there needs to be training, and there needs to be some sort of maybe some institutional changes? Sure. But to outright disband makes absolutely no sense at all. None. We have become our own worst enemies. That's what we have become. And so I want you guys to really think about that. I would love some responses on from what you guys are thinking. Like, have we forgotten? Have we? Honest question, and I want some honest answers. Have we forgotten? Because I am disturbed in some ways by what I see, and it's hurtful to me. It really is, because I love this country. I'm not the person who's like, this whole country needs to be destroyed and rebuilt from the bottom up. It's not going to happen. I love this country with its imperfections. There is no perfect country, there is no perfect state, and there is no perfect person. Can we do better? Yes, we can. We can do better, we can grow, we can develop, we can be better people. That's what someone who's patriotic, that's how they think. We can do better. And we can constructively criticize the things that are wrong, while at the same time celebrating the things that are right and finding solutions to make us a better union, a more perfect union. I can see things that I don't like but it's important to find a solution to them and not just moan and groan about what's wrong. I actively try to find solutions and to forge partnerships to make things better. But this country, in a lot of ways, I think we have forgotten. I really think we have forgotten. Joshua, the second chapter, says that there was a nation, that the nation had forgotten God. That after Joshua and all the people in his generation had died off, all those that had witnessed the miracles, the signs, and the wonders had gone, then came a generation that did not know God. Those of us who were around at that time, it is our responsibility to make sure that the generations below us do not forget who we were at that time, how we loved one another, how we loved our God, how we loved our family and our friends and our community, how we treated each other, how we respected each other, how we loved each other, how we said good morning, how we said God loves you to the stranger who was in the grocery store. We owe it to the younger generation, to those who are coming behind us, to not just tweet out, never forget, but to be the examples of individuals who have never forgotten and never will, and will not allow them to forget that we can be better. We can do better. We can love more. And yes, God does love us more than we can ever imagine. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. There's nothing wrong with loving each other. There's nothing wrong with respecting each other. There's nothing wrong with honoring one another. And that we don't need to be in these separate tribes destroying one another and destroying this country. That unity does not necessarily mean agreement on every issue. But it means that we look out for the greater good of the entire nation and the peoples of this nation. Thank you for joining me on this special episode. I know I wasn't ripping and roaring and hooting and hollering and all that stuff. But this is something that's been on my mind, has bothered me for a while, seeing the direction of this country and seeing how we treat each other. We can do better, folks. We can do better with God's help. I'm author, leadership, and team development speaker Joe Woodley. Thank you for joining me on another Key Moments for Faith. God bless you. I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Never forget. Never forget.